We live in a world where failure is treated like an enemy, something to be feared, avoided, and erased from our records as quickly as possible. We are taught almost from birth that the measure of a life is how often we win, not how often we learn. We often imagine that the people we admire, the innovators, the leaders, the creators, have walked a path paved with brilliance, but if we could trace their journey, we would find a trail littered with false starts, abandoned projects, and experiments gone wrong. Their greatness is not in avoiding failure, but in working with it as a craftsman works with stone, shaping it into something enduring. Failure also invites us into the humility of learning. When everything works perfectly, we are tempted to believe we have mastered the game. But when the walls collapse around our plans, we are reminded that life is larger, more complex, and more mysterious than we imagined. In this way, failure strips away the arrogance that blinds us and replaces it with curiosity. It says, here is what you did not yet understand. Here is where your assumptions misled you. This is a gift, though it may arrive wrapped in the discomfort of disappointment. And there is another dimension. Failure slows us down. In a world obsessed with speed, failure forces a pause. It stops the ceaseless forward motion and asks us to sit still with ourselves, to look carefully at the path behind and ahead. In this stillness, the mind becomes more attentive, more able to see subtle connections and patterns that our hurry might have overlooked. Just as the ground must rest before it can bear another harvest, we too need these seasons of apparent loss to regenerate our strength and insight. To embrace failure as the foundation of success requires a shift in perception. Instead of seeing it as a void, we can see it as a container, one that holds the lessons, resilience, and creativity that will fuel our future achievements. The discomfort of failure is the friction that polishes our rough edges, the resistance that strengthens our resolve. It is not a detour from the road to success. It is the road itself, winding and uneven, shaping us as much as it carries us forward. Failure has a peculiar way of unsettling the comfortable patterns we cling to. It disrupts the smooth flow of our expectations, and in doing so, it forces us out of the narrow channels of familiarity into the wider currents of transformation. When everything is going well, the mind often rests in complacency, wrapped in the illusion that what has worked before will always work. But failure breaks this illusion like a sudden thunderclap, shaking the foundation beneath us and demanding that we pay attention to what we have overlooked or misunderstood. This breaking open is essential because growth requires space for new ideas, new approaches, and new perspectives to take root. Without disruption, there is little incentive for change, and the mind remains confined within its previous limits. Failure acts like a crack in the shell of comfort through which the light of insight can enter. It exposes the gaps in our knowledge and the weaknesses in our methods, revealing the areas where we must stretch beyond what we thought possible. In that moment of exposure, we experience vulnerability. Vulnerability is often feared because it feels like weakness, but in truth it is the doorway to transformation. To be vulnerable is to admit that we do not have all the answers, that we are still learning, and that our identity is not fixed. This openness is what allows us to receive new information and adapt. Failure forces us to shed the rigid self-images that no longer serve us and to step into a more fluid, expansive way of being. Transformation triggered by failure is not always immediate or comfortable. Sometimes it unfolds slowly, like the gradual melting of ice under the sun's warmth. Other times it arrives as a sudden shift, a moment of insight that rewires how we understand ourselves and our circumstances. Either way, failure is the catalyst that moves us from one version of ourselves to a more evolved one. It breaks the spell of certainty and invites us to embrace the mystery of becoming. This process is deeply humbling. When we face failure, we are reminded that life is not entirely under our control. Our plans, no matter how carefully laid, can unravel, and the outcomes we desire can slip through our fingers. Yet in this humility lies a profound freedom. Freed from the burden of needing to control every outcome, we become more willing to experiment, to take risks, and to engage fully with the present moment. The cracks opened by failure allow us to see beyond the narrow horizon of certainty into the vast landscape of possibility. Moreover, failure teaches us patience. Growth and transformation cannot be rushed. Like a tree that must weather storms and seasons before it bears fruit, our progress unfolds in its own time. When failure disrupts us, it slows down the frantic pace of trying to force success and invites us to trust the unfolding process. It asks us to hold space for the unknown, to be comfortable with not knowing, and to allow ourselves the grace to grow gradually. In this way, failure is not a punishment, but a necessary part of the dance of life. It is the tension that makes movement possible, the friction that polishes our character, and the invitation to expand beyond the limitations of our previous selves. The discomfort it brings is a sign that transformation is underway, that the shell of the old is cracking open to reveal the new emerging within. To resist failure is to resist change itself. But when we learn to welcome it, to see it as the breaking open it truly is, we begin to live more fully and authentically. We become co-creators with life, participating in the unfolding mystery, rather than clinging to fixed outcomes. And in that participation, transformation becomes not a distant goal, but a living, breathing presence in each moment. Failure holds up a mirror to the self, reflecting not the polished image we often prefer to present to the world, but the raw, unvarnished truth of where we stand. When success arrives without challenge, it offers little invitation for deep reflection. It simply reinforces our existing beliefs and comforts us with confirmation. But failure, in its starkness, demands honor. It exposes the gap between who we are and who we aspire to be, revealing the limits of our understanding, the blind spots in our vision, and the cracks in our plans. This moment of truth is uncomfortable, yet it is also a gift, because it provides the precise material we need to learn and grow. To look honestly at failure is to resist the temptation to blame others, to make excuses, or to deny responsibility. Instead, it asks us to turn inward, to examine our own choices, assumptions, and efforts with a clear-eyed curiosity. This is not a judgmental gaze, but a compassionate inquiry, one that seeks to understand rather than condemn. In doing so, we begin to uncover the root causes of the setback. Was it a lack of preparation? An error in judgment? A misunderstanding of the circumstances? Or perhaps a deeper misalignment between our values and our actions? This process of reflection transforms failure from a painful event into a profound teacher. It invites us to ask not just what went wrong, but what can this reveal about how I think, feel, and act. Through this inquiry, the lessons of failure become accessible. They move beyond surface-level fixes and enter the realm of insight that reshapes our approach to life. Moreover, honest reflection on failure cultivates humility. It reminds us that we are works in progress, that mastery is a lifelong journey rather than a destination. This humility opens the door to learning, making us more receptive to feedback, more willing to experiment, and less afraid to admit when we don't know. It softens the ego's grip, which often resists change by insisting on being right or appearing competent. In the space created by reflection, wisdom begins to emerge. Wisdom is not simply knowledge accumulated, but the deep understanding gained from integrating experience, especially difficult experience, into the fabric of our being. This wisdom guides future decisions, helping us to navigate complexity with greater clarity and confidence. Reflection also helps us distinguish between failure as a fixed label and failure as a temporary state. The former traps us in identity. The latter invites movement. When we see failure as a reflection rather than a definition, we free ourselves from the paralysis of shame and open the path toward growth. This shift in perspective changes our relationship to failure. It becomes less a threat and more a teacher. The practice of honest reflection requires courage. It means looking at ourselves without flinching,